Sam's name when she wanted him quieter, not different. This was what different looked like. Perline continued, I can file an emergency civil injunction tonight to halt any movement on that property application while the bank's fraud department reviews the file. That buys time. She glanced back down at Ulysses's notes. Separately, a financial crimes detective I've worked with before has seen a handful of complaints over the last 2 years involving relationship-based investment schemes using similar patterns. Fabricated portfolio summaries, temporary transfer explanations, shared account access. She looked back at me. Nobody has enough yet for a larger case. But your future son-in-law's name now overlaps with documentation they may want to review more closely. That settled heavier than everything else had. Not because Sam was worse than I believed, because it meant he had possibly done versions of this before. Perline set both pages aside and looked at me with the first non-legal question of the evening. Are you prepared for what this does to your daughter before it helps her? The room went quiet. I thought about Candace in her wedding dress, her hand on Sam's arm, the way her face opened when I walked into the fitting. I thought about what tomorrow was going to do to all of that. The dress, the flowers, the version of her life she had been building toward. Then I thought about the door frame she touched the day her father died. The house Sam had tried to reach with forged paperwork. Yes, I said. Perline nodded once. She picked up her pen. The injunction request goes out tonight. The bank will receive a fraud alert attached to the pending application by morning. She closed the folder carefully. As for Sam and his mother, the detective intends to make contact before they leave town. Quietly. No public spectacle unless somebody creates one. I looked at her. At the wedding. Most likely before or immediately after the ceremony begins. The goal is containment, not theater. She said it plainly. The way you say something when you need the other person to understand that events are already in motion. And the only remaining question is whether they're emotionally prepared for them. I looked at her. Both of them. Both of them. I drove home in the dark and did not turn the radio on. I got home at 8:30 and sat in my car for 10 minutes before I went inside. Not because I did not know what to do next, because there was nothing left to do. Perline had the file. The injunction was processing. The detective was moving. Every piece I had spent 4 days assembling was now in the hands of people whose job was to carry it the rest of the way. What remained was the hardest part of all of it. Waiting. I went inside. I did not turn on the television. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water I did not drink, and I thought about tomorrow. Not the moment in the ceremony. Perline had that coordinated. The moment after. Candace's face when the room shifted around her. What that face was going to do with what it was about to receive. I thought about whether I had the right words ready. Then I thought about whether words were even the right instrument for what tomorrow was going to ask of both of us. My phone was on the table. Candace's name was right there. I did not call her. She was somewhere across the city right now, believing tomorrow was going to be the best day of her life. Whatever sleep she managed to find tonight was the last sleep she was going to have, as a woman who did not know what Sam Lattimore had been building inside her life. I was not going to take that from her. It was the last thing I could give her that would not cost her something. A few more hours of not knowing. I would carry tonight alone. I have done that before. The first time my life came apart, it happened the way these things always happen. Not in a single moment, but in the slow recognition of a pattern you had been looking at for months without naming it. I was sitting in my own kitchen when it finally became undeniable. I remember looking at that room, a room I had cooked in, argued in, planned my future in, and feeling it become unfamiliar. Not because anything in it had changed, because I had finally understood what had been happening inside it. I rebuilt from that kitchen, slowly, over years. I learned the particular discipline of a woman who has decided that what was taken from her is not the last word about what she is worth. That discipline has a cost that does not show on the outside. It lives underneath. In the way you check certain things twice, in the way trust arrives later and leaves faster, in the way you sometimes stand in a room that is yours and still feel the ghost of the room it used to be. Candace was not going to rebuild from a kitchen alone. I would make sure of that. I thought about Vernette. She was going to have her own version of this night eventually. Not because of a husband, because of a son. She was going to sit somewhere in that house she had kept so carefully and understand what her silence in that hallway and her signature at that bank had built together. The difference between us is that she had a moment when she could have chosen differently. When Sam said what he said and she heard it clearly, she had a choice I never had. She chose wrong. My phone lit up. Per line, one sentence. Injunction confirmed. Detective is set for both of them. I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the table, closed my eyes, and for the first time in 4 days, I let myself breathe all the way out. Tomorrow was already decided. I just had to show up for it. I was up before my alarm. I stood in front of my closet for longer than the decision required. Not because I did not know what I was wearing, I had laid it out the night before, but because getting dressed for this particular morning required something beyond choosing clothes. It required settling into what I already knew was coming and deciding one more time that I was ready for it. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Somewhere across Birmingham, Sam Lattimore was getting dressed too, probably with the particular ease of a man who believed today was the day his plan completed. The wedding, the marriage, the access, all of it arriving on schedule, wrapped in flowers and vows, with everyone he needed in the same room and none of them knowing what he knew. He had not accounted for what I knew. I thought about Vernette pulling her church clothes from the closet. The woman who had built a life around appearing a certain way in this city, composed, upstanding. A mother who raised her son right. She was going to walk into that venue today and sit in the front row in her good dress, believing the worst thing that had happened to her this week was her son marrying a black woman. She had no idea what her signature had already set in motion. I arrived at the venue 40 minutes before the ceremony. Celestine was already seated near the back, third row from the last, exactly where I had asked her to be. She had not asked me a single question when I called 2 nights ago. I had simply said stay close and stay calm no matter what happens in that room, and she had said, I'll be there. That was 20 years of friendship working exactly the way it was supposed to. Our eyes met when I walked in. I gave her the smallest nod. She looked forward and did not look back. My phone buzzed once. Per line, gray jacket, aisle seat, third row from back, left side, second one on the right. Financial crimes unit, quiet approach only. I walked to my seat. I noted both of them. One look, nothing more. They did not look like police. That was the point. 2 men in ordinary jackets sitting separately near the aisle, like guests who had arrived early and preferred the back rows. Then I put my phone away and did not touch it again. Candace found me before the processional began. She came around the corner in her dress with her hands pressed together in front of her the way she does when she is trying to hold herself steady. And when she saw me, her whole face shifted into something that was relief and nerves and love all at once. I opened my arms. She walked into them. I held her, and I did not speak because there was nothing I could say in that moment that the moment could hold. She was completely present in the life she believed she was walking into. Every part of her was here, was ready, was certain. She pulled back slightly. "Mama, you're holding me too tight." I loosened my arms. I did not let go. She laughed a little, straightened her dress, and went to take her place. I watched her walk away, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. The ceremony began. Sam was at the altar. He scanned the room the way he always did, measuring, accounting. And when he found me, he nodded, smooth, unhurried. The nod of a man who has run the numbers and liked the result. I nodded back. He had accounted for every variable in that room. He had missed one. The officiant's voice was the only sound in the room. I was seated 4 rows back on the left side, hands folded in my lap, watching the ceremony move forward the way ceremonies do, unhurried, scripted, everyone playing their assigned role. Candace was at the front with her flowers and her dress and her whole heart visible on her face. Sam was beside her, looking exactly like a man who had arrived exactly where he intended to be. I have sat in rooms before knowing something nobody else in them knew. It has a particular feeling, not power exactly, more like weight. The specific weight of information that has not yet become real for everyone else in the space. I sat with that weight, and I watched. Sam felt something shift before he could name it. I could see it from where I sat. A small change in his posture. Nothing the people around him would notice. His eyes moved across the room once, quickly, the way eyes move when the body is registering something the mind has not caught up to yet. He glanced toward the back rows. Vernette was composed, back straight, hands folded, the careful posture of a woman performing attendance at an event she had never wanted. She had come because Sam asked her to. She was sitting in the front row in her good dress in front of every person in Birmingham she had ever needed to think well of her. She did not know her name was already attached to investigative paperwork moving through attorneys and the bank's fraud department. She did not know the transfer she had accepted had already triggered formal review through the bank's financial crimes unit. Sam looked back at the officiant, rolled his shoulders slightly, settled. He had decided whatever he felt was nothing. Then the 2 plainclothes investigators stood, not abruptly, calmly. The way professionals move when they are trying not to create a spectacle before they have to. Perline had explained it to me that morning. The bank wanted immediate contact made before the ceremony concluded and before anybody left the venue. Quiet separation first. Questions second. Containment before reaction. One investigator moved along the side aisle toward the altar. The other moved toward the front row, toward Vernette. Not to arrest her, not publicly. Just to ask her to step into a private room adjacent to the lobby before the room understood what was happening. I watched Sam notice the man approaching him, and I watched the exact moment his face understood what his body had been trying to tell him for the last 3 minutes. The composure did not shatter. It emptied. There is a difference. Shattering makes noise, emptying makes silence. And what crossed Sam Lattimore's face in that moment was the silence of a man whose entire calculation had just come back wrong. He looked across the room. He found me. I did not look away. I watched him work through it. The rehearsal dinner, the smile, the raised glass, the nod this morning. Every moment he had read as confirmation that he had managed me correctly. He had not managed me. He had underestimated me. And now the full cost of that miscalculation was walking toward him in a gray jacket, carrying a leather credentials case. Candace's face moved through confusion, then concern, then something I did not yet have a name for. I held my face completely still. It was the last thing I could do for her from this distance. The investigator reached the altar and spoke quietly enough that only the first few rows could hear. Sam's expression changed almost invisibly. Not panic, recognition. In the front row, Vernette rose slowly to her feet. Not because she chose to stand, because someone was asking her to. The room did not erupt. That is the thing about real moments. They do not announce themselves the way people expect. There was no screaming, no dramatic collapse. The ceremony simply stopped, the way a clock stops, and every person in that room went very still inside the silence that followed. Sam was speaking to the detective in a low voice, with his back partially turned to the guests. Controlled, measured. The performance of a man who had not yet accepted that the performance was over. His hands were at his sides. His jaw was set. He was still, calculating. Then he looked across the room and found me. I watched it happen. The exact moment the calculation completed and came back wrong. He went through it in his eyes. The rehearsal dinner hallway, the smile I gave him, the glass I raised. Every moment he had filed as evidence that he had managed me. He had not managed me. He had handed me a 4-day head start and called it security. His composure did not break. It emptied. I held his gaze and I did not blink. In the front row, Vernette was being asked to step aside. The detective's voice was low and the words were professional, but the effect was not. The effect was a woman in her church clothes being separated from her son's wedding ceremony in front of every person in Birmingham she had spent decades positioning herself carefully around. She was not being arrested. The room did not know that. The room only saw what it saw. She looked at Sam. Sam did not look back at her. I watched her understand that. It moved across her face slowly, the way cold moves, not sharp, just settling. Her son, for whom she had gone to that bank, for whom she had signed her name without asking why, for whom she had stood in a hallway and swallowed her own conscience, could not find it in himself to meet her eyes in the moment she needed him to. She looked across the room at me. I did not hold her gaze the way I had held Sam's. I looked at her the way you look at a woman who made a choice and is now standing inside what that choice built. That was all. That was enough. She was moving toward the side corridor when she slowed near where I was standing. Whatever she had intended to say gathered itself and then did not come. The words did not arrive. I did not wait for them. I said it quietly. Just the two of us inside the noise of a room rearranging itself around what had just happened. You heard him say it. You went to the bank anyway. She had no answer for that. She walked on. That was the closing of something that had been open since the rehearsal dinner. Not a confrontation. One sentence. The truth delivered plainly in a room full of people who would spend years talking about this day. Candace had not moved through any of it. She was still standing where the ceremony had stopped, her flowers at her side, her face doing something I could not fully read from where I stood. Then she moved. Not toward Sam, not toward me. She walked down the side aisle to the back of the room and sat down in a chair near the last row. She sat with the particular stillness of a person whose internal architecture has just been removed from underneath them without warning. She did not cry. She did not speak. I walked toward her. She looked up when I reached her. Her expression had no clean name. It was grief and confusion and the beginning of a question she already knew the answer to, but had not yet found the words to ask out loud. The flowers were still on the tables. Nobody had thought to move them yet. The room was nearly empty, a few guests lingering near the entrance, not sure whether to leave or stay, doing the thing people do when something has happened that does not have a social script. Pearline was near the far wall with her phone and her folder. Vernette had been walked to a side room 10 minutes ago. Sam was gone. Candace and I were sitting in 2 chairs that someone had arranged for guests, and nobody had rearranged since. Not across from each other, side by side, facing the empty space where the ceremony had stopped. I told her everything. Not the legal structure, Perline would walk her through that in her own time and in her own language. What I gave Candace were the human details. The hallway at the rehearsal dinner. What I heard and what I recognized underneath it. Not the racial hostility, I told her. I have survived that before. What I recognized was the coldness. The architecture of a man who had looked at her and seen a position rather than a person. She listened without interrupting. I told her about Ulysses, about the 4 days, about the fabricated statements and what they meant. That every number Sam had ever shown her, every projected return, every conversation about their financial future together, had been built on documents that did not exist. The quiet on her face shifted. I watched her get there. The moment she understood where Sam had gotten his blueprint. Not from research, not from observation, from her. From the things she had told him in the early months when she believed she was being known by someone who wanted to know her. She had handed him her inheritance story, her father's house, her mother's history, her own financial picture, all of it offered freely, the way you offer things to someone you have decided to trust. He had taken notes. She said, he used what I told him. Yes. She sat with that. Then, what about Vernette? I told her about the wire transfer, the signature, what the law calls a person who accepts funds without asking questions they had every reason to ask. Candace was quiet for a moment. Then she said, she heard him say it, and she still came and sat in the front row. Yes. And the law is going to deal with her too. Perline is handling it. She nodded. Not satisfied exactly. Something more complicated than satisfied. The nod of a woman filing information away to process later when she has more room for it. Then she turned and looked at me directly for the first time since I had sat down beside her. How long did you know something was wrong? Not the fraud. Him. I did not look away. Longer than I said anything. Why? Because I knew you wouldn't hear it from me. She held my eyes for a moment. Then she looked back at the empty room in front of us. She did not argue with it. We both knew it was true. We had built that particular dynamic together over years, her resistance and my interference, and the long, complicated space between a mother who saw too much and a daughter who needed to see for herself. That space had cost us both something this week. After a while, she said, I want to see the documents. I looked toward Perline. Perline crossed the room without being asked twice and set the folder on Candace's lap. Candace opened it. She began to read. She read for a long time. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The flowers were still on the tables, and the room held all of it. The wreckage, the truth, and 2 women sitting inside both. Perline called 3 days after the wedding. The formal charging process has started, she said. Wire fraud exposure, forgery, financial fraud. Papers shifted softly on her end. The bank officially voided the pending loan application after the fraud review. The property is clean, wholly in Candace's name, untouched. And the recovery process on the unauthorized transfers is moving through the fraud department. Then she told me about Vernette. The civil investigative demand had been served. Vernette's attorney had done exactly what Perline predicted, advised cooperation immediately. Vernette had sat across from investigators and answered every question they asked. Sam's instructions, the wire transfer, what he told her it was, and what she chose not to ask. Her statements were now part of the investigative file being built against her son. The $18,000 was already being moved toward recovery. I thought about Vernette sitting across from those investigators in whatever room that happened in. 30 years of carefully maintained standing in Birmingham's church community, the good dress, the composed posture, the reputation she had polished like furniture. And now she was the woman cooperating with investigators to protect herself from becoming part of the case. That city is not large enough for that to stay private. It never has been. She had stood in that hallway and said nothing. Now she had sat across from investigators and said everything. Those two decisions had found each other in the end. Candace called that evening, not about the case. She said, "Can I come over?" I said yes before she finished asking. She arrived with food she had stopped to pick up on the way, which told me she had been in the car thinking about this visit long enough to prepare for it. We ate mostly in silence at my kitchen table. The comfortable kind. The kind that has known the same two people for a long time. After a while, she said, "He knew about Daddy's house." Yes. I told him what it meant. Everything it represented. I handed him exactly what he needed. "You trusted someone you loved," I said. "That is not the same as handing him anything." She was quiet. Then, "I almost saw it. The night before the wedding. I had it right there in my hand, and I put it down." "I know." She looked at me. "How do you know?" I set my fork down. "Because I did the same thing once, a long time ago. And it cost me more than I want to count." She waited. So I told her. The full story, not the outline, the truth. The first husband and the joint account I did not examine closely enough because looking closely felt like distrust. And I had spent too long confusing trust with love, and love with safety. The morning I opened the bank statement and saw the withdrawals, not one large theft, but months of careful patient removal. The way you drain something slowly enough that the thing being drained does not notice until it is already empty. The attorney I could not afford properly. The settlement I accepted because I had no better option. The two jobs I worked for 6 years afterward. Not to get back to where I was, because where I was had been built on ground that was never as solid as I believed. To build something new. Something that belonged entirely to me and could be left to a daughter who deserved better than the rubble her mother had started from. I looked at her. "What you inherited from your father was built on top of what I built from nothing. You never knew that until right now." Candace did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Did he ever face any consequences?" "No." She looked at me steadily. Something had settled in her face, not anger. Something quieter and more permanent than anger. "This one will," she said. "Both of them will." Perline's final confirmation came on a Tuesday morning. The EFTA recovery process for the unauthorized transfers had been formally initiated. 45 to 90 days for full recovery at that amount. But the documentation was clean, and the path was confirmed. The fabricated investment statements had been folded into the wire fraud charge. Sam's firm had issued a public suspension pending investigation. In Birmingham, that kind of announcement does not stay in a press release. It moves through the professional community the way everything moves in this city, fast and with names attached. Vernette's cooperation agreement was filed and sealed. She had saved herself from prosecution and in doing so handed her son's conviction a significant piece of its foundation. The church community she had navigated for 30 years, the same community that had watched her walk into that wedding venue in her good dress, now knew what she had signed her name to and why she had eventually talked. Both of those things were true simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other out. I thought about her for a moment. Not with satisfaction. With the particular clarity you feel when something has resolved the way it was always going to resolve once the right people had the right information. She had spent years building a version of herself she could present to that city. So had I. The difference is what we were each willing to do to protect what we had built. Candace called that afternoon and asked if I wanted to meet her at the house, her father's house. I said yes. I arrived first. I let myself in with the key she had given me years ago and stood in the front room while the afternoon light came through the windows, the way it always had in this house. Unhurried, particular to this specific set of rooms, unchanged by everything that had been attempted against it. Sam had forged a signature to reach this house. Vernette had accepted $18,000 to help him move faster toward it. Between the two of them, they had built what they believed was an airtight approach to something that did not belong to them. The house was still standing, still wholly in Candace's name. They had gotten close. Neither of them had gotten here. I thought about the first time my life was emptied. The bank statement. The months of removal I had not seen until it was complete. The years that followed. The discipline of rebuilding. The specific damage that lives underneath that discipline in a woman who has learned to check certain things twice and trust certain things later. I had not gotten justice that first time. The man responsible had walked away without consequence, and I had rebuilt from whatever he left behind without anyone to help me carry it. What I had gotten instead was 15 years of knowing exactly what I was looking at. When it came for Candace, I did not hesitate. I did not second guess. I did not mistake the architecture for anything other than what it was, because I had lived inside that architecture before, and I had spent 15 years learning every room of it. Candace came in quietly and stood beside me. We looked at the house together, the walls, the light, the particular silence of a space that knows it has been here longer than whatever was attempted against it. She took my hand. After a moment, she said, "He thought we were the kind of women you could just take from. He thought low was where we lived." I looked at my daughter. The first time it happened, I had nothing to fight with. This time, I had 15 years of knowing exactly what I was looking at. I held her hand. Low was never our last stop, baby. It was just where we learned to see. She squeezed my hand and did not let go. Outside, the Birmingham light held. The house was still theirs.